What can be said about Demon Slayer that hasn't been said already? It was by far the biggest sensation in the anime community last year. The manga even managed to outsell One Piece, which is a monumental, if not a near impossible task. All this hype has led to an extremely large and dedicated fanbase. At the risk of inflaming the internet, I'm here to say that it's not entirely deserved.
If you sell it to me, I will!
Do not get me wrong, I enjoyed my time reading the manga and watching the show. Compared to most shonen, I actually think that Demon Slayer is among the better series out there. However, that does not mean that it is without flaws. Many, many flaws. These problems are not new either. They have been around since the beginning of the series, and only managed to worsen over time. Diving into this, I'm ready to anger the anime community right off the bat. The animation of the show is actually pretty bad. Now, while it is true that there's some absolutely breathtaking animation, especially when Tanjiro fights Rui, this does not excuse the abundant use of horrendous CG, and by abundant, I mean abundant. The CG shows up all the time, and is frankly nearly Berserk 2016 levels of horrible. The models for the characters and frame rate of the footage makes it look so cheap and choppy. Ufotable attempts to hide the problems by obscuring the CG in darkness, but it can't fix everything. What I don't understand is that people get really defensive about the CG, even claiming that it looks really good. I just don't get it at all. It honestly just looks like eye poop to me. The honest truth about this is that the CG is a cost-cutting measure to increase the animation quality for the scenes it needs to look good, and while that is true, in my opinion it is not worth the sacrifice. It's not like Ufotable isn't familiar with high-cost projects with lots of CG. Remember Unlimited Budget Works? The show legitimately looks better in almost every way, including the use of CG, which is limited to mostly backgrounds and lighting. Now, anime productions are complicated affairs, and budget is not the only contributing factor to animation quality. I'm not going to pretend to know everything about how anime is made. I'm not even saying that I expect another Unlimited Blade Works in terms of quality. All I am saying is that I would have preferred moments of terrible 2D animation, like parts of Black Clover, or really any show, over terrible 3D animation. And it's not just the animation of the show that's bad, the manga itself has some of the worst art I have ever seen. Please look at her panels and tell me it's not bad. I literally had a hard time even reading the manga. I thought of giving it up many times because it looked so horrible. Now, animation is low-hanging fruit. Plenty of shows can be amazing with poor production quality, and plenty of manga can be amazing with terrible art. I love Fullmetal Alchemist, but let's be honest, the manga art is pretty bad. But the real problems are with the writing. The very first example I can think of that really bothered me is the part of the show that people love the most, when Tanjiro fights Louis. The fight on its own is amazing, wonderful music choice, fantastic animation, and an overall weeb hype factor that is very high. The problems start when Louis picks his head back up and says that Tanjiro had no hope of cutting it off. I understand what Koyoharu Gotoge was going for here. She was trying to show the vast difference in skill between Tanjiro and the Hashira. It was too early in the story for him to defeat one of the 12 Kizuki. He simply isn't powerful enough yet. I actually think for pacing and power scaling reasons, that is a good thing. However, the way it happens ultimately delegitimizes the fight that happened one episode previous. Having Giyu show up and absolutely body Louis in basically one attack makes everything seem pointless beforehand. I know that Tanjiro technically weakened the guy for Giyu to unleash the final hit. With how easy it was for him though, if Tanjiro didn't fight him at all, do you really think it would have been hard for Giyu to win? I would place my bets on no. I also think that Tanjiro and Nezuko's fight was too triumphant to not make it feel like a betrayal. Like I said earlier, the music, animation, and weeb hype are all what makes this fight amazing, but it's also part of its greatest downfall. Instead of having a short period of time where they are winning and then get stomped, they have a super huge, multi-minute long comeback where Tanjiro unleashes a completely new power. It's just too climactic and epic, which makes the part where Louis gets back up feel exhausting and boring. The problem is worsened even further by separating Rui's defeat and haha lol just kidding into multiple episodes. I remember watching episode 19 and being so excited, and the next week I felt absolutely cheated by this. The feeling would have been softened, even if only slightly, if all he did was pick his head back up in the last 10 seconds of episode 19. Some people may think I am overreacting or nitpicking, but I really do not think I am. This was a pivotal moment in the show, and to have it essentially gone in only 1 week actually actively reduced my enjoyment of the show. And even if you do not think it was a big deal, the author of the manga apparently agrees with the sentiment. Now, I don't know if she has actually said anything about it, but she did confront this issue directly again and much improved it. In the Entertainment District arc of the manga, Tanjiro and pals come into conflict with two members of the upper 6 Kizuki, Gyutaro and Daki. Tanjiro, Inosuke, Zenitsu, and Nezuko all put together are still not powerful enough to defeat them on their own. The thing though this time is that instead of them beating them and then just needing a Hashira to show up and help at the end, Tengen and his wives are there helping the whole time. And the thing is that Tanjiro and gang still get all their moments to shine while still not being powerful enough to do this on their own. As well as Tanjiro and Tengen getting to deal a killing blow on Gyutaro together, which is satisfying for the reader. The only problem I had with this arc really overall was looting Nezuko. Jesus Christ. When looking at Kimetsu no Yaiba in a broader sense, there is a serious pacing issue going on in general. I can't believe I'm saying this about a shonen manga, but it was actually too short. And that is not meant in the way that I'm misreading it. The story and characters are just too big for the length of story being told. There are way too many Hashira and Kizuki in the story for them all to get appropriate amounts of time dedicated to them. Each major arc can dedicate enough room for about 1 to 2 Hashira and Kizuki each, meaning by the time the final arc starts, only about 5 of the 9 Hashira and 10 of the 16 total Kizuki have had any time paneled for them almost at all. There really needed to be more arcs to develop these characters because when the Infinity Castle arc starts, now these remaining characters all have to have their backstories and personalities crammed in as fast as possible. This leads to the vast majority of the series feeling way too fast, barely stopping to develop any characters, and the final arc feeling like he's moving at the pace of a snail. There's so much content to cover in these roughly 75 last chapters that it was honestly painful to read at times. The exposition dumping just becomes overwhelming in this stretch of the manga. For the most action-heavy arc of the series, there's so much flashbacking, internal monologuing, and talking because all of this information that could have been given to us naturally over time needs to be forced down our throats because there isn't any time left at this point anymore. The pacing also leads to other big issues as well. Characters that have very important roles in the story from a narrative perspective are sidelined because of the lightning-fast pacing. I honestly thought Giyu and Orokudaki were going to be in the series far more than the time they were given in actuality. It's very weird how these characters have sparse moments of screen time compared to their importance. Giyu is literally the character that introduces Tanjiro and Nezuko to the demon-slaying world. He is the push that sends them down the path that they ultimately follow. So why is he in basically none of the manga until the final arc where he only really gets one fight with Tanjiro and one fight with the rest of the Hashira against Muzan? I really thought he would have been more of a senpai nurturing kind of role, but he basically does nothing for the majority of the series, and I found that very disappointing. Orokudaki's situation is even worse in this regard. The only arc he gets in the entire series is literally the first arc where Tanjiro is training with him. Besides minor cutaways in the final arc that go back to him, he essentially has no role in the story at all after the beginning. Usually the sensei character has far more prevalence throughout, and for good reason, because they have pre-established abilities and wisdom that are great for developing the protagonist. Kimetsu no Yaiba wastes both these characters who could really add to the depth of Tanjiro's growth because once again there just is not enough time. Even the arguably most important character in the series, Nezuko, is barely in the final arc at all. She becomes a MacGuffin for Muzan to obtain, so they just hide her away the whole time. This is extremely disappointing because it shows a lack of flexibility in her writing to think of a more creative way to deal with her characters. Hell, even in Naruto, when Naruto himself becomes the MacGuffin in the war arc, he still trains and develops during that time. The final arc of the series in general, though, has a lot of problems with wrapping things up satisfyingly. The character development and general climax is just all over the place. To start off with, I really hate what is done to Zenitsu. I really like that he's finally overcoming his cowardice and able to fight awake, even obtaining his own new thunder breathing form. The problem though is with how it's done. After finding out that his senpai becomes Kizuki, his master kills himself from the shame. This event sparks a newfound anger and vengeance in him to fight. The problem is not the setup with this development, it is the execution. These two characters have been even less developed than Giyu and Orokudaki. I literally can't even remember their names. They only had one flashback each before the final arc. So there's a narrative dissonance with this event because these characters are not important enough for us to care about what happens to them. We only second-handedly care because we care about what's happening with Zenitsu. The other problem I have with this is that rather than Zenitsu still struggling with his fear in a meaningful way and gradually getting braver over time, he's just awake now. It's honestly kind of insulting to his arc because he could suddenly just be awake the whole time. It's lazy shorthand, and once again, like many other issues in this manga, it needed much more time to develop. I mean, honestly, Zenitsu had no transition between these abilities. He just goes from fully sleeping to fully awake, and there's nothing in between. It's super disappointing. The worst shorthand used in this series, though, undermines the literal entire plot. Nezuko becomes human because she feels like it. There's no explanation, there's no real build-up other than gaining the ability to live in the sun, which also happens for no reason. We can possibly infer that her kindness, possibly not eating humans, or generally being a good person, made her into a human again, but that's not even a good enough reason. Even if it were to be explained, the entire goal, the foundation of this series, is built upon Nezuko becoming human, and is completely glossed over to focus on the fight with Muzan. To me, it feels like a slap in the face. Like all my time was wasted to find out the answer to the biggest question this show is just basically forgotten about. This is a genuine betrayal to the reader and leaves a very sour taste in our mouths by the end. So since Nezuko becoming human was basically ignored, the final fight with Muzan must be great, right? No, it's not. Generally speaking, it's just an overly long mess. The fight lasts nearly 20 chapters and just drags on and on. The Hashira all try to come help out as well as the main crew, and it just feels endless. Longer fights do not mean better fights. Generally, it gets fatiguing when a fight lasts too long, and that is exactly the issue with the final fight in Demon Slayer. Many parts of it could have been truncated to keep the pacing feeling fresh during the climax. I also found it very disappointing that Tanjiro didn't end up completing his 13th form of Hinokami breathing. Basically, Tanjiro needs to perform all 12 previous forms in succession over and over to achieve the 13th form, and he does just that, but no matter what he does, he still cannot manage to bring it out of him. I understand the intent, which is that Tanjiro is not the most powerful user of Hinokami Kakura, or even the most powerful person in the current manga, and that he needs the help of other people to defeat Muzan. I get it, I even like that, and that would have been fine if there was much less time dedicated to him achieving the form. It's a similar issue to what I had when he fought Louis. It builds up too long to lead to nothing. Gotoge even managed, as explained earlier, to learn from this mistake, and she just makes it again right at the end of the series. Then all the stuff with Tanjiro becoming a demon for a few chapters just felt completely unnecessary, like padding that really did not add anything at all to the story. It is very weird too, because the series has the complete opposite issue of insanely rushed pacing, except for this instance where for some reason she felt it was important to just drag on the final act, even after the battle has already been won. On top of all of these issues, she just did not stick the final landing either. There's very little wrap up for our characters at the end of the series. Instead, it just takes a very weird turn and decides to make the final chapter take place in modern day. I understand the intent, it was to show that everyone who died was reincarnated and had a happy ending after all. It just did not work at all for me. I don't care about these random characters, and I think the majority of people agree that it would have been much better to see a more proper send-off to the people we spent hundreds of chapters with. I mean, we get like 20 pages at the end in chapter 204 to deal with all these characters' climaxes and resolutions. It's just really not enough time. There could be more issues that I am not thinking of right now, but the major issues I have are covered. Honestly, I quite like Demon Slayer overall. I know I've spent this entire video tearing it to shreds, but really that is because all the praise in the world has already been given to the series. It definitely deserves a lot of, if not even most of the attention it's getting, but I also think that it just had way too many issues to be considered this perfect series like a lot of people think it is. So to anyone who may have been offended by this video, I am not attacking your opinions or even the series. I just merely laid out the issues I have with it. And you know what? It's okay to have problems with this series. It's okay to like something and still think it's flawed. I think overall it was a good read, and I recommend all of you to read it as well. But if you like this video, let me know. Your support is appreciated, and I'll see you weebs in the next video.